You see, in time, I was made chief editor of the Territorial Enterprise. I lasted just a week at that post. I edited that paper 6 days, and then I had 5 duels on my hands. I wouldn't have minded that if it had been the custom for those other people to challenge me. Then I would have simply declined with thanks, but it was not so. If you abused a man in the paper, if you called him names, they had no rights there such as we have. If the man didn't like it, you had to challenge him and shoot him. Of course, I didn't want to do this, but the publisher said it was the custom. Society must be protected. If I could not do the duties of my position, he would have to hire somebody else. This man I was supposed to challenge to a duel got touched at something I wrote about him. I don't know what it was now. I may have called him a thief or a grave robber or an idiot or something. He fought very shy of me at first, and so I plied him with bloodthirsty challenges all the more. Finally, he began to take an interest in this thing. It seemed as though he really was going to enter into it at last. All our boys were delighted at the prospect, but I was not. This was not a turn I was expecting in things. I had taken for my second a fiery, peppery little fellow named Steve Gillis. I'll tell more about him and his brother Jim later. Anyway, Steve was full of fight and anxious to have this thing fixed up right away. He took me over into a little ravine beyond the town to practice. It was the custom to fight with Colt's revolvers at 15 steps. We borrowed a stable door for a mark from a gentleman who was absent. We set up that stable door, and then we propped a fence rail up against the middle to represent my antagonist, and put a squash on it to represent his head. He was a very light, thin man, very thin, the poorest kind of material for a duel. There was no success about it. I could not hit the rail, and I could not hit the squash. And finally, when I found I could not hit the door either, I began to get a little discouraged. But when I noticed that I crippled one of the boys occasionally, I thought it was not so bad. I was dangerous with a pistol, just not reliable. Finally, we heard some shooting going on over in the other ravine. We knew what that meant. The other party was practicing. I didn't feel comfortable. They might straggle over the ridge and see what was going on, and when they saw no bullet hole in the barn door, it would be too much encouragement for them. Just then, a little bird, a little larger than a sparrow, lit on the sagebrush nearby. Steve whipped out his revolver and shot his head off. The boys picked up the bird, and we were talking about it when the other dueling party came over the ridge and came down to see what was going on. When my adversary's second saw the bird, he said, "How far off was that?" Steve said, "About 30 steps. "Who did that?" "Why, Twain, of course." "Did he, indeed?" "Can he do that often?" "Well, he can do that about 4 times out of 5. I knew that little rascal was lying, but I didn't like to tell him so. I was one of those kind of men that don't like to be too frank or too familiar in a matter such as that, so I didn't say anything. But it was a comfort to see those fellas' underjaws drop, to see them turn blue about the gills and look sick. They went off and got their man and took him home. And when I got home, I found a little note from those parties, peremptorily declining the fight. How sore the boys were! How indignant they were! And so was I. But I was not distressed about it. I thought I could stand it, perhaps. But then came a piece of news that changed my life. We received word that a law had just passed in Nevada making dueling, or even challenging someone to a duel, a penitentiary offense for both principals and the seconds. That it was to be strictly enforced, and unless we got out of town in a limited number of hours, an example was to be made of us. So, just as my piloting days had ended because of outbreak of war, my Nevada days ended because of an aborted duel. Steve and I left on the stage for San Francisco, an outrageous and rollicking city full of bohemians. I soon found work as a reporter on a paper there, the Morning Call. Speaking of rollicking, I wasn't there too long before experiencing something Frisco was to become well known for.